And joining us now to discuss this is Jeremy Rosenthal, a trial attorney and founding partner of Rosenthal, Kalabas and Therian. So good morning to you, Jeremy. Give us your initial thoughts here regarding this case where he pleaded guilty to avoid capital punishment.
Well, this ends a long and terrible chapter for the city of El Paso and this part of Texas. Obviously, there's a lot of very strong opinions here. The DA ultimately made the decision that the consensus amongst the victims was to just be done. Patrick Crucius is going to prison. He will never get out of prison. That was already the case in federal court. And that for the sake of healing, for the sake of just sort of being done, he accepted this guilty plea. The DA's office extended it. And it closes this long and very terrible chapter for El Paso.
So we're talking about 23 people killed here in the shooting. Why didn't prosecutors push for the death penalty?
Our district attorneys in Texas are obviously elected, and they've got their pulse, their fingers on the pulse of the community. Also, prosecutors are going to be very much in touch with victims. And in this instance, you would have to think that the DA met with as many of the victims and their families as he could, and basically kind of respecting their wishes. And certainly, if you poll all of the victims in the case and all the family of the victims of this case, you're never going to get a consensus on something as divisive as this. So only they know what's truly there. There was a troubled history in this prosecution, though. There was an El Paso district attorney by the name of Yvonne Rosales, who left behind a legacy of, there's just no way to describe it other than incompetence. Thousands of cases, over 1,000 cases had to be dismissed when she left office. There was an interim prosecutor who was appointed for some while, and now there's been a third prosecutor in about 4 years who kind of made this decision. He actually apologized for this district attorney's actions. She was criticized for her handling of this case, missing deadlines in this case, improper witness contact in this case. How much of that contributed to this, I don't know. But every time something like this gets brought up with these people, with the victims and their families, it's just the wound getting opened again. So ultimately, the DA made the decision that seeking the death penalty would be more divisive, more painful than it would be to just let him go and sit forever.
Can you also talk to us from a legal standpoint? What weight does a life sentence without parole carry in terms of accountability in the eyes of the law compared to a death sentence?
A death sentence is just that, but it's not imminent and it takes a long time to do. Also, we have to sort of keep in mind that this young man, these are horrible, heinous, terrible crimes, all predicated on hate. But this young man had a lot of problems, too. His lawyers describe a schizophrenic break with reality, which is not uncommon amongst men this age. In Texas, our insanity laws, not guilty by reason of insanity, are very difficult for a defendant to try to get acquitted from. What has to happen is that your break from reality, or your misunderstanding of reality, if you will, has to be so significant that you can't even appreciate what you were doing was wrong. This young man, very troubled, got himself in an internet wormhole, basically, reading and believing falsities about immigration, got in his car, drove over 700 miles to murder people. So I don't know that there was ever going to be a successful defense mounted on the reason of his insanity. There's simply too much here. That said, the same insanity can be mitigatory in terms of capital punishment, and maybe they stood a chance of having the death penalty spared in this case, and maybe that's something that kind of went into it. If you remember the Parkland, Florida shooter, that shooter was also not sentenced to death. And if the DA goes and promises all the victims, well, we're going to go and seek the death penalty, and they don't get it, again, that can be extremely painful. Going to prison without parole, I mean, there's a lot of very strong opinions on capital punishment. There's many people who firmly believe in it. There's many people who firmly believe that life in prison is as much or worse of a penalty. There's no right answer to that question. That's obviously a moral quandary that the law really is unequipped to solve. But this was a very complicated case and probably not an easy decision at all for the El Paso district attorney to make.
Okay, so Jeremy, there's one detail that I'm wondering. How do attorneys ensure that a plea deal is voluntary when the defendant has a diagnosed mental disorder? Can you shed some light on that for me?
That's a great question. There's a difference between not guilty by reason of insanity and what is called competency. Competency is your ability to have a rational and factual understanding of the charges against you and your ability to communicate with counsel. It happens very frequently where a defendant is having a psychological issue or some trauma that happens when the offense is committed. But then as they get to trial, we can do things. The system can do things. Courts can order treatment. There can be medications which sort of restore competency for the criminal. So this young man was legally competent, or his lawyers had to certify that he was legally competent, and the judge had to make a finding that he was legally competent in order to accept that plea. Sometimes, and probably in this case, I would almost be certain that there were some psychological evaluations which certified that he was competent to stand trial, even if he was suffering some kind of psychosis at the time of the crime.
Okay, Jeremy, that's our time today. And as always, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Have a great day.